Hi, I'm Christopher from Greater Than Games, and I'm here today to talk about how to run demos of Sentinel Comics, the role-playing game. So you'll need a few things to run this game. You'll need some game material itself, as well as dice in sizes from D4 up through D12, and note cards and a marker. We'll get into all of those things as we go. If you're running demos from the starter kit, you will have access to all of the material inside, but you'll only need a few parts of it. There's the gameplay guide, which is a useful thing to have at the table, as it contains all the materials that you would need for the rules and things. As well, there's various issues, and you won't want to use most of these issues. All of these issues cover a lot of material, and you'll only want to use issue number 1. Issue number 1, it starts the story from the starter kit and has a great introductory session in it. So go ahead and take these other issues and set them aside. You will need the character booklets, or if you're not running for the starter kit, whatever sort of pre-generated characters we have for the various heroes. The first thing to do is familiarize all of your players with the various elements of the game, from making your basic actions like overcome checks, attacks, boost and hinders, and defend checks. These are all covered in the starter kit's cover that doubles as a GM screen with lots of information, and so you can just use that to go over how people make their basic actions, which we'll talk about here in a second. Then hand out all of the individual characters, explaining a bit about who each of these characters are and helping people make choices based on their play preferences. Once characters have their character sheets, you can explain how those characters make their various basic actions, which we'll talk about now. The simplest action is the attack action, in which you make a pool of 3 dice, 1 from your powers, 1 from your qualities, and 1 from your status. So if Absolute Zero wants to shoot a blast of cold at someone, he would take his cold power, which is a D12, his ranged combat quality, which is a D10, and the status die that he's currently in, be it his green zone, his yellow zone, or his red zone. As he's currently in the green zone, we'll be using a D8 for that. You roll those 3 dice, and you take the mid result. Absolute Zero rolled a 1, a 4, and a 10, so his mid result is a 4, and thus he does 4 damage on his attack. In Sentinel Comics, the role-playing game, you don't defend every time someone attacks, but if on your turn you're worried about a big source of damage coming at you, or trying to defend another person, you might make a defend check. When defending, you build a die pool of 3 dice to explain how you're defending. So, for instance, if Wraith is wanting to defend against an attack, she might use her agility to flip out of the way of the attack, and her finesse quality to avoid the attack, as well as the zone die that she's in, taking 1 die from her powers, 1 die from her qualities, and 1 die from her status. She rolls those 3 dice and takes the mid result, which is a 5 in this case. The next time damage will be dealt to the Wraith or the defended target that the Wraith was defending, that damage is reduced by 5, the total that was rolled. Overcome actions are used when your hero needs to deal with a challenge or an obstacle of some sort, in which the answer isn't just punching. To do this, once again, you build a pool of 3 dice, 1 from your powers, 1 from your quality, and 1 from your status. So if Legacy is wanting to overcome an obstacle to tear through a steel wall to get to the bad guys, he would use his power of strength, which is a D10, his quality of leadership, which is a D10, and his status die, which if he's in the green zone is a D6. He takes those 3 dice, rolls them, and takes the mid result. In this case, the mid result is a 7, and this number, unlike attack and defend, is compared against a chart. The overcome chart can be found on the GM screen, in the gameplay guide, or on any sort of hero reference that you have for the players, such as the last couple pages of the booklets from the starter kit. Since Legacy rolled a 7 for this result, we look at the chart and we see that 4 through 7 means the action succeeds, but with a minor twist. Twists are one of the interesting ways that the Sentinel Comics role-playing game uses to bring players into the action and make the decisions that the players are making as important as the story that the GM is telling. Whenever a player invokes a major or minor twist, you, the GM, can bring one about from the environment or from the villain in play. However, it's more likely that the players will bring one themselves from their principles. On the front of each character sheet are 2 principles belonging to that hero. Those 2 principles inform how they act within games and also give clues as to the sorts of minor or major twists that might befall these heroes. Encourage your players to come up with creative minor and major twists that influence their characters and work with the action at the table. The last couple basic actions are boost and hinder, which are opposites of each other. Boosting is making you or an ally stronger, whereas hindering is making an opponent weaker. If Tachyon wanted to boost an ally, she might use her inventions, which is a power that gives her a D8, and her science, which is a quality that gives her a D12, to create something for an ally. She would also use her status die, which if she's in the green zone is a D10. She would roll those 3 dice and take the mid result. The mid result in this case is a 6, and much like overcomes, boosting and hindering looks at a chart. With a 6, we see that the chart says that gives a +2 boost. Unless something lists that boost as persistent or exclusive, which might be a thing you would get from an ability, that boost will be a one-time effect. You would write that boost on a note card with the name of the boost, as well as writing +2 to indicate that it's a +2, and give it to that hero. The next time they made an action, they could, before rolling the dice, use that boost to give them a bonus on their effect die. We've talked about status dice a bit, mentioned that it's the 3rd die whenever you build a die pool. That comes from either the hero's health or the environment itself. Each hero has a health range that as they lose health and as the scene gets more dangerous, they get pushed from the green zone into the yellow zone and into the red zone and ultimately can go completely out. And this is where we get the name of the system from. Green, yellow, red, out is the gyro system. If the hero Unity has 23 health and takes 4 damage, dropping her to 19, this will push her from the green zone to the yellow zone. This changes her status die from a D10 to a D8. Some characters have status dice that go up as they take more damage, and others have status dice that go down. But they all change based on how they react to the situation. As mentioned, the environment can also change your status without changing your health. Most scenes take place in some environment, and those environments have an environment tracker that you should set up at the beginning of that scene. If you're playing in the environment of Megalopolis, you might make a card that says Megalopolis on it and shows the green, yellow, and red zones on the scene tracker. As things happen in each scene, this can progress the scene tracker, always pushing it towards the red zone. On each turn, during the action order, the environment itself can be passed to as any other character or actor within the environment. And whenever it does, it marks off a box on the scene tracker. There can also be villain and environmental aspects that progress the scene tracker. If the scene itself gets pushed from the green to the yellow zone, everything within that scene acts as if it's in the yellow zone. This means that heroes now have access to their yellow zone status dice, as well as to their yellow zone abilities. We'll talk about abilities in a minute. Similarly, if the scene gets pushed from the yellow to the red zone, this unlocks everybody's red status dice and red abilities. And ultimately, if the scene goes to out, that usually ends the scene in a failure on the hero's parts. It might not necessarily be a catastrophic destruction of that very environment, but it usually is bad. Various issues and stories will explain what happens in the case of a scene being pushed all the way to the red zone. We've mentioned abilities, and those are things that all heroes have on their character sheet. On the back of each character, underneath your powers, qualities, and status dice, it also has your green abilities, your yellow abilities, and your red ability, and an out ability in case you're ever incapacitated in a scene. When you're in the green zone, you have access to just your green abilities. When you're in the yellow zone, either due to your health range or to the environment itself, you have access to your yellow and green abilities. And when you're in the red zone, you have access to your red, yellow, and green abilities. The only time you don't have access to your green abilities is when you're out, in which case you only have your out ability. When explaining how the game works, it's important to give each player a chance to read through their powers, their qualities, their principles, and also their abilities, so they, going into the game, have an idea of how their character works. Before handing this material out, when preparing to run a session, it's good for you, the GM, to look over these abilities to have some general tips on how to encourage your players to best play their heroes. The most important piece of advice you can give to a player is to play to their character's principles. If they're not sure what they should do in a scene or how their character would act, look at their principles. Both of your principles give you good role-playing advice, as well as the sorts of things that you're worried about with your minor and major twists. So, we've covered the first segment of what you'll be doing when you're running a Sentinel Comics role-playing game session, which is handing everybody their heroes and helping them understand how to use those heroes. We've talked about your character sheets, your principles, your powers and qualities, your abilities, and how to use all those things to be a hero. And that's what you'll need to communicate to each of the players before even getting into any of the story content. But now, we're going to get into some story content. Whenever you're running a demo session of Sentinel Comics, the role-playing game, you'll be running from an issue, either issue 1 from the starter kit, or a different issue that we prepared for this convention or from another book. Before running that session, it's important that you've read that issue through, because in each issue we give a lot of tips and hints on how it is you should be delivering this material and sharing this information with your players. Once you've gone through the information your players need on how to run their characters, it's time to dive into the issue. And when you do that, begin with description. Describe the sights and sounds of what the heroes are experiencing. Give them opportunities to engage with their surroundings. Give them motivations. The issues themselves that you're playing from should have plenty of information on how to get into that. And it's important that before you start, you read through this information so that you yourself have these tools at hand. When running the issue, feel free to have a GM screen of some sort to keep your information behind. Behind that GM screen, you can have note cards that you've prepared in advance with the various elements people will face in a scene. However, you will also be making note cards on the fly, as if somebody makes a boost, you'll want to, in that moment, get that player to name that boost, write it on a card, and give it to that player. Similarly, whenever someone is hindered, you write the penalty down on a card with the number and the name, and give it to that target, be it a hero or one of your minions. Speaking of minions, minions are one of the easiest things to run in Sentinel Comics, the role-playing game. All minions are represented by a single die size, so a minion that's listed as a D6 minion in the issue means that they are controlled by a single 6-sided die. Whenever they attack, they roll that die and deal that amount of damage. Whenever they would need to do an overcome, a boost, or a hindrance, they roll their die, and you reference that result against the chart on your GM screen or in the rulebook. So, for instance, if a D6 Velociraptor minion is attacking a hero, it would roll its die, and on the roll of a 6, deal 6 damage to that hero. Minions also try to survive when attacked by rolling a save with their die. If a hero makes a die pool of a D10, a D8, and a D6 to attack, they roll and they take their mid, which is a 5. They have an attack of 5 coming at this minion. This minion rolls its save, and with a roll of a 2, it fails its save and is destroyed. Whenever a hero attacks a minion and successfully attacks, that minion is taken out. If a minion succeeds on its save by rolling equal to or higher than the number of the hero's attack, in this case, a 5 or a 6, that minion saves, but that minion doesn't get off scot-free. When a minion is attacked by a hero, they're in trouble. A minion that successfully makes its save is degraded 1 die size, a D6 minion becoming a D4 minion. Now, because the dice don't get any smaller than D4, when a hero attacks a D4 minion, regardless of whether or not they succeed, the minion will be destroyed. Once a minion is degraded from a D6 to a D4, they continue using that die to make their attacks, their overcomes, their boosts and hinders. That die is now who that minion is. Minions can start as large as a D12 or as small as a D6, and they degrade each time they succeed on their save, or they're destroyed if they ever fail on their save. Another type of opponent that will come up in issues is lieutenants. Lieutenants work similarly to minions in that they are governed by a single die size. However, they do not degrade when they succeed on their save, and they only degrade when they fail their save. They can never be outright destroyed in one hit. So when a hero attacks a lieutenant, they roll, and their mid of 4 comes against this lieutenant's D8. The lieutenant rolls its die, and with a roll of 7, prevents any damage. They successfully defend and do not degrade, nor are they destroyed. Now, if they'd rolled a 1 or 2 or a 3, they would fail their save, and thus this D8 minion would degrade to a D6. The other type of opponent that heroes may face is a full villain. Not a minion nor a lieutenant, a full villain, which has a character sheet similar to a hero. They have their powers and qualities, and then for their status, instead of it being based on their health, it's based on some gimmick, such as number of devices or amount of schemes in play. Similar to heroes, they build a pool of 3 dice using their powers, quality, and status, and they have a list of abilities underneath their stat block that shows the sorts of things they can do. Each villain comes with various hints and tips on how to run that character, as can be found in the issues that you'll be running. We talked before about the scene tracker, in which you write the name of the environment and the green, yellow, and red zone that you can mark off as the scene progresses. Additionally, whenever a new element enters the scene, it's important to make a card for it so that heroes have a frame of reference for that entity. For instance, that Velociraptor we talked about would need a card of its own. And on that card, besides the name of the minion, you would also want to put the die size. You also need to note how many there are. Is there just one Velociraptor? If so, this card is sufficient. However, if you need more characters, you might want to put something like there are 3 velociraptors by writing a 3 on there, or you might want to list each d6 individually. However works best for you as a GM. The important part is that the players can tell by looking at that card that there are 3 6-sided die minion velociraptors coming at them. Treat this group of minions as a single point in the action order, which is how initiative is done in the Sentinel Comics role-playing game. When it's their turn, all 3 of them act, and they act individually, but they all act on that same action order point before moving on to another player. Let's talk about how action order works while we're here. The initiative system in Sentinel Comics, the role-playing game, uses an action order system that is entirely elective-based, meaning a character takes their turn and then passes it on to another actor in the scene. In this current scene, we have various heroes around the table, as well as the environment of Megalopolis itself, and for some reason in Megalopolis, there are these 3 velociraptors. So the actors are the heroes, the environment, and this one group of minions. If Tachyon went first, because she's very fast, at the end of her turn, she would choose someone to go next. She could choose one of her allies, or she could choose the velociraptors, or she could choose the environment itself. The only restriction on who to choose next is you can't choose someone who has already gone this round, or if it's the end of a round and you're moving on to a next round, you cannot choose yourself to start the next round. After a hero is gone, if they pass it to one of your elements, since you have them on these cards, you can easily have them take their action and then turn the card sideways to give an easy indication that that character has already acted this scene. Say a hero passes it to the velociraptors. Now there's 3 velociraptors and 5 heroes, so the velociraptors are pretty outnumbered. You as the GM have to make a decision whether or not you're going to have all 3 velociraptors gang up on one hero, which isn't as fun for everybody, or have them spread their attacks out across different heroes. The issue that you're playing from will give you information on the tactics and behavior of these minions, as well as any special abilities they might have, such as a +1 to attack or a -1 to defense. After they take their turn that card sideways and have them pass it either to another hero in the scene or to another environmental or villain element. On the environment turn, you do any environment actions that you have in play from the issue, and you mark the scene tracker off 1 point before passing it on to any other actors in the scene. The most important tool you have as a GM running one of these Sentinel Comics role-playing game demos is the issue itself. Within there, you will find lists of twists, of minions and lieutenants, and of all the things you'll need to make this story one that is compelling and engaging for your players at the table. If you're ever dealing with a player who's inexperienced with RPGs or doesn't really know what they're doing at the table, remind them that they've got the tools they need at their hands. The powers and qualities give you easy words to use to describe your actions. You've got a list of exciting words under your power list and under your quality list. So if you're not sure what you're doing, pick a couple that sound interesting to you and pick one of your actions to tie those things together. This will help players that are a little bit more reticent take control of their character at the table. Also, when passing the action order to a player who isn't sure what they want to do, start with leading questions like, Tachyon, you've got some velociraptors in front of you. What are you going to do about it? Or, Bunker, you've seen everything that happened. How are you going to help your friends? Things that are a call to action that drive that player to bring their hero to life. Be sure to encourage your players to use their abilities. When you move from the green zone to the yellow zone on the scene tracker, inform everyone, now that we're in the yellow zone, your yellow abilities are available to you, and you should check those out because they're pretty powerful. And don't forget to always ask your players for appropriate twists when the scene calls for it. Whenever an overcome would succeed with a minor or major twist, let the heroes know that they have the option to provide those twists. This makes the players storytellers as much as the GM. Before running your first ever demo of the Sentinel Comics role-playing game, see if you can sit in on someone else running a demo. There might be another GM around who's running a session earlier than yours that you could watch to get some tips from them. Don't hesitate to ask any of us questions. Know that the best way to get better at GMing is just to do lots of it. So with all that, you should be in good shape to run demos of Sentinel Comics the role-playing game.